Poem for me is not something that I write, it's something that is written. I ponder and think, conjure and pontificate. Sometimes I postulate. Eventually I write a note, an essay, an article. Eventually I write a poem, or rather the poem writes me. Out of me it falls, faster than I fall out of bed. Out of me it is. So now I can go back about who I was without the poem inside of me. Like a balloon in a tree, it has to flee the tree, it has to be free. The poem and me have to be free. Without freedom, there is no poetry. Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's Video Podcast. Today is Friday, June the 25th, 2021. And the little poem I just read was something I wrote a while ago. And for me, it was sort of very descriptive of how I feel in general. I feel a strong sense of freedom about my life, the freedom to go about and do things that I've wanted to do. I don't like being restrained, and I enjoy what I consider my sense of freedom. So for me, freedom has always been a huge issue. The fact that my birthday is June 19th, and which just became a national holiday, I jokingly said that this woman marched from that I've been lobbying for this for the last 40 or so years, and a woman finally marched from Texas to Washington lobbying for Juneteenth to be my birthday. The woman was Opal Lee, I believe her name was, and she was 93 years old. And she's been celebrating Juneteenth all of her life. I haven't been. It's been my birthday, but I haven't really been aware of it or what the implication was or really what happened. But now that it's happened, I am aware. And now we know that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed back in 1863, but it took 2.5 years for the news to reach Texas. So in spite of the fact that all the slaves had been freed 2 years earlier, it literally took 2.5 years for that news to get to Texas. Texas isn't exactly on the front page of, gee, what can we do that's right? There's a movie out, I think the movie is News of the World with Tom Hanks, and he plays a guy that goes around the country reading the news. And in this particular story, he winds up helping this abandoned young girl find a home for herself. It's an interesting movie, and when he's doing his reading, these soldiers happen to be in the same room, and he's wondering why they're there, and then we find out why they're there. So it's a little bit of a part of the story that Juneteenth happened right in the middle of this story there. On last week's show, I mentioned Juneteenth and the freedom thing, and then I also made one mistake, one glaring mistake. I said that the insurrection took place on the inauguration. No, it wasn't the inauguration. It was the day that they were verifying the Electoral College votes in the Senate. That was January 6th. That's when the riot took place. The inauguration was 2 weeks later, and we didn't have anything happen. There's three things that have been really I've been following a little bit more closely than I'd like to. Let me just throw you over here for a second. I've shown you this in the past, and it didn't have these other words written on it. The spiral basically represents time. And what happens when you start to historically look at things, you find out that the closer we are right now into where we're at, the faster things seem to be moving. So if you were to say take a 1,000-year period here and break it into various sections and see different types of things that were going on during the period, whether it was explorations or intellectual advancements or technical advancements, blah, blah, blah. There was sort of a sectional construct to each one of these time periods. Well, as we're getting closer to the ends of things, which some people would call the apocalypse or the turning point or the tipping point or the Mayan calendar, almost every religious and profiting group, prophetic group, has something about a date happening from a few years ago up to the next 10 or 20 years. We seem to be in the middle of what's known as an age of Aquarius, which is not an age of peace, love, and It's more of an age of anarchy that's going on. So what we're witnessing right now is the demise of something. And as something dies, as a system dies, the worst elements will rear their ugly heads. So as we see the democracy and capitalism withering, driven by religion, especially the what we call the desert religions, especially driven by the religions. So we're going to come to this tipping point, which we may be in the middle of right now. It's hard to say exactly when these things are, but you can sort of see them. What happens at the end of the tipping point is there's going to be a resurgence of something new. And I've seen the new as what I call a spiritual political economy. So the religion is going to get replaced by a spiritualness. The democracy, which is the political part of this, will be being led to by the hashtag Me Too movement, which is basically representative of equality for everybody. The hashtag Me Too movement, women are no less equal than men. We should all be treated fairly and equivalently. And the economy, I'm seeing that the economy is going to go into more of a cooperative state. It has to. It has to. If it doesn't, we're not going to be here. It's as simple as that. We can't keep producing tons of goods to get consumed that are causing environmental and ecological problems in order to generate profit. So we have to think of a new way out of this. And there's lots of thoughts on this. But so this is the basic premise, the sketch that I've been working with for a long time. And like I said, I just wrote those other words into it to flesh it out a little bit. So the democracy and the capitalism, and Rachel has been on this for the last few months extensively. Now, prior to Rachel, as in Rachel Maddow, getting on this, almost all the magazines, including, say, the New York Review of Books, the New Republic, the Progressive, New Yorker even, have had articles for the last 4 years about the demise of democracy in America. Now, prior to Trump, democracy wasn't exactly doing really well. Prior to Trump, democracy was in big, big trouble. With Trump, democracy got in much worse trouble. So he's exacerbated the problem, made it way, 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 way worse than it originally was. Trump is a gangster. You've got to understand that. The first rule here is that Trump is a gangster. His father was a gangster who did business with the Gambino family. Trump got dragged into Manhattan by Roy Cohn, who knew the Italian mob. Some interesting articles about Roy Cohn just popped up in the paper again as Rudy Giuliani got temporarily suspended of his law license. Well, Roy Cohn was disbarred for unscrupulous activities back in the 80s. And Roy Cohn is the guy who died of AIDS, who is memorialized in the movie Angels in America. He's the guy that's in the bed, laying there, dying and looking like this dying angel. That's Roy Cohn, the most unscrupulous, fascistic lawyer in American history. This guy made lying the password of his whole career. Have you seen Roger Stone do this? You saw Nixon do this? Well, it was Roy Cohn who invented this. That was Roy Cohn. And when Trump sits there and says, "Where's my Cohen?" he's not talking about Michael Cohen. He's talking about Roy Cohn. And he still misses him. So Roy Cohn is the guy, I've said this in the past, who literally introduced Trump to the mob, the Italian mob in Manhattan, who did business with him and lent him money, enough money to open the casinos that he could bankrupt, because they were making enough money laundering money through his other Trump Soho. So the mob was with him up till the point when Roy Cohn died in '89. And when Roy Cohn died, that's when Felix Slater showed up and became Trump's new point person to introduce him to the Russian mob. A whole other story there. So Trump is a sleazy gangster who, along the way, became a bit of a TV star, much like the Teflon Don back in the 70s. And he seems to have hoodwinked most of what you would call flyover America, middle America. the flyover states. The people in New York knew him for what he was and weren't happy with him and were glad to get him out of there. Most of the people on the West Coast recognize him for the unscrupulous gangster character that he is. But his television persona is what has carried him through, and it's got to be the television persona that has elevated him to the status he is, and I don't particularly understand it, how far it's gone. Okay, so a little bit about that. There were two stories that were in the newspaper this week that I thought were really stunning examples of what, here we go, of what's happening. What you're looking at is the headline there. It says the price of a steak is rising while ranchers lose money. And then at the bottom of the page, we had a picture of the, let's see, there's the cows. And there's the cows. That was at the bottom of the picture. So I'll just put that up on the side here for a minute. So the article, there it is. It was the whole business section last week. And are we over here? Okay, let's get this over here. Yeah. The price of steak is rising while ranchers lose money. And this is sort of endemic of everything that's going on within the system. Demand for beef is spiking as more Americans dine out and grill again. We've had a bit of a hiatus for the last year or so. But the profits aren't being evenly distributed. Imagine that. Ranchers, grocery chains, and others claim big meat packers are to blame. There's a whole big article here about how these big meat packing houses have pretty much monopolized the meat packing industry. Remember last spring when there was a couple of, during the pandemic was getting going, and there were outbreaks in the meatpacking industry at a couple of, I think Tyson had one, and another one, Smith something, had a major outbreak. And Trump's people basically went in there and subverted the regulatory agencies in order to allow the meat packers to keep the people on the line, keep the product going. Keep the product going. Don't worry about the people on the line. A few of them die. It's not the end of the world. We can live with that. We can live with that. Yeah, sure we can. Yeah, unless they're in your family, then you can't live with it. So everybody's making money, or everybody's losing money, and this is what typically happens. The grocery store guy and the producer of the product, so the guy's making the orange juice over here and the guy's selling it over here. Someplace in the middle is where all the money is going to be getting made. All the money is going to be getting made, and it's happening in banking, it's happening in housing, it's happening in the medical industry. Now, something like Amazon comes along, and Amazon winds up not making, but owning what's being made, in a sense, by distributing everything from all of these guys and then undercutting them. So a lot of times, let's say somebody's selling something in the store for, say, $2. So the product sells for $2. So the big distributor, say it's Amazon, he makes a deal with the guy and says, I'll take a large quantity, but we got to make it less than $2 so that I can compete. So the order is going to be so big that this guy undercuts himself in order to sell a larger quantity. I'll give you an example. If you go up to the town of Calistoga, you cannot buy a bottle of Calistoga in the town of Calistoga because the plant is right there. They don't need a distributor, and they would undercut the distribution. So they have to make an agreement that they don't undercut the distribution. So this kind of thing goes on with Amazon, which is why Amazon's been able to monopolize all the merchandise, and they're doing the delivery. So they've sort of taken the whole concept of shopping, brought it into one, all sort of under one roof, so to speak, and are able to control it from, they're able to control from the manufacturing, although they don't quite own the manufacturing part yet, but they're a little bit of an exception to the rule, which is what makes them so interesting. They're breaking all the rules. So the thing going on with the meat industry was, to me, it was just emblematic of everything going on in all of these industries. The prices are rising. The manufacturers and the end sellers are getting screwed, and the people, and somebody is making a lot of money out of the whole thing. There was a second headline there. It says, Big Tech blitzes D.C., as in Washington, D.C., to push back on antitrust. So Tim Cook is lobbying all over Washington with an army of lobbyists, and they're arguing about the Congress wants to do a little regulation here because these guys are completely out of control. So, meaning Amazon, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google. And they've created monopolies within the industry. They control the price points. And Apple, Tim Cook is screaming and yelling that, oh, we're going to crimp innovation and we're going to slow down progress, and which might be the best thing that could happen in the world. So they're running all over Washington, and they're all upset that they're trying to bring some regulation into the industry. That was the two. The third story that jumped out at me for the week had to do with these guys here. The Catholic bishops vote to draft a communion guideline that could exclude abortion proponents. Now, Joe Biden is probably the nicest, most decent guy they've had in the White House in a long time. Seriously. The guy is fairly religious, more so than probably anybody they've had other than maybe Jimmy Carter. He doesn't believe in abortions, but he believes that the woman has the right to make that choice. That it's not his decision to make, that it's not the state's decision to make. Well, I couldn't agree more. And because of that position, the Catholic bishops, who have become a very right-wing group, are speaking out against Joe Biden, and they're saying that, and they're trying to draft this resolution that he won't be able to receive communion. Well, they're not going to be able to draft the resolution because they need a total majority. They're not going to be able to do it. But they're drafting this resolution that says they want to do it, and that's a sort of a first step. So they've gotten extremely political. Now, not too many of you remember, but when Kennedy was president, before he became president, the big argument against electing him was that the Vatican was going to be dictating policy in America. Well, that never happened. It was never, but it was a scare that was put out by the Republicans. It was never happened. Today, the Supreme Court is mostly right-wing Republican Catholics. And the Catholics have gone from being progressive, reasonable, middle-of-the-road Democrats with mostly working-class people as part of their base, to God knows what they are today. It started in the 60s. It started in the 60s with the spread of the Opus Dei people. Opus Dei was that really right-wing group, as the people that were beating themselves and putting chains on to draw blood. And I'll tell you, if you want to experience pain, you just have to sit in a lotus posture for about 5 minutes and it'll happen. You don't have to beat yourself to death. Just some simple meditation will bring you up with the reality of pain if you're looking to discover that. So the Opus Dei people, who may have been responsible for the execution of Thomas Merton, who was executed in a freak accident, they said, back in the late 60s. And then you had there's another one, I've carried this one around with me for quite a while, the mysterious death of, whoops, let me move it over. Mysterious death of John Paul II. This is the guy that was in office for 33 days, the shortest reign in history. The day he got into office, he wanted to clean up the Vatican Bank and get the Opus Dei people out of Rome. Well, he was dead within a month, and he was poisoned, and his body was cremated. No Pope has ever been cremated other than him. He's the only Pope that was ever cremated. It's John Paul I. This is back in 1978. His body was cremated, and then the people who were responsible for his murder, one after another, were either killed or committed suicide over a period of years. And the last one, his picture was in the New York Times, and the guy hung himself off the London Bridge back in the mid-'80s, I think in '85. Anyway, Opus Dei has been pushing within the church for years and they've made quite an inroad into the Catholic Church. And along the way, they've encouraged the readings of the Bible. And I'll tell you, once you start reading the Bible, you're in. Watch out. The book that's in your hand today shows the second half of the book, the New Testament, shows 4 people with the major writers: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, forget about 4 people. There are about 24 people who've been involved with that book. And along the way, the church, and including these 4 guys that you see in that picture over there, or people like those 4 guys you see in the picture over there, have been excluding the books that they don't like and including the ones they do like. So while I was at a recent wedding ceremony in Florida, of all places, Florida, in a Catholic Mass, I listened to part of a statement from an epistle by Paul, I believe, where the slave is being told to do homage to his master. Well, if you got a book that's talking about the slave being subservient to his master, if you got a book that's allowing you to stone people to death, if you're raining fire and brimstone down one minute and raising people from the dead the next minute, then whatever it is doesn't sound to me like a anthropomorphic or a human-centered kind of a thing. It sounds like it's a law of nature. Now, maybe God, boom, period, is a law of nature and not necessarily an anthropomorphic being that looks a lot like us, white, male, and add a beard. I throw that out there just as a thought. This picture of these 4 guys here had me really so upset. I feel like they're going to cause that they're trying to cause a split in the whole church, break off the progressives from the conservatives, and this could put Donald T. back in the White House in a few more years if there's enough craziness to support this whole thing. All right, that was a little bit like the news that I wanted to talk about. A couple of other things. There was a little bit of a rift when I mentioned there's a little bit of a rift on Fox News right now between Tucker, the zombie newscaster, Tucker Carlson. He looks like he just came out of a coffin half the time. I cannot watch him for more than 5 or 10 seconds. He seems to be in a little bit of a rift with Hannity, who I also can't stand. I can't stand watching these people. It's lies after lie after lie. Well, this week, Carlson got in a little bit of trouble. He went after this general and called him, I think, a pig, stupid or something. This general is being interrogated by Matt Gaetz about critical race theory. Well, did this general put this guy down? And he pointed out that the people at West Point was actually an institution, it was a university, and that people read there. And that he has read Marx, and he has read Lenin, and he has read Mao. And you can read Mao and not be a communist, and you can read Karl Marx and not be a Marxist. So you can read and find out about things and not be what it is you're reading, which he very eloquently pointed out, and also pointed out that the armed services were not a place where that they were going to politicize this critical race theory. It caused a bit of a rift with Hannity, and I'm not sure exactly. I guess maybe I don't know exactly what. I just saw the headline where Hannity was going after Carlson, so. It seems like every week or two you get a little bit of a thing going on Fox News where in the midst of all their lies and their propaganda, they throw out 1 or 2 things that are, oh, we can't go that far. That's about it. Okay, I opened up with a little poem. I talked mostly news. Let's switch culturally for a second. There's 2 books I wanted to show. One was, this was the Time Life, about every week, every day probably, Life magazine puts out another magazine. When you're in the major supermarkets, you see them all over the place. And this week the one was about Bob Dylan, who is 80 years old. Happy 80th birthday. So I'm a few years younger than him. America's Greatest Songwriter. It's a really neat book. A lot of pictures. If you're a Dylan fan, there's a lot of great pictures in here. I've never seen a whole bunch of them, especially him with A lot of early pictures of him with Joan Baez and a few other girls with Allen Ginsberg, and all over the place with lots of James Baldwin. He's all over the place with everybody. When he first appeared in Carnegie Hall in 1961, all seats $2. $2. The Folklore Center presents Bob Dylan in his first New York concert, November 1961. And the first time he appeared is a few years earlier. He's still in Minnesota, and I think it's 1958. Rock and Roll for Teenagers, 100 Top Records, featuring Monty Leroy and Bobby Zimmerman. Bobby Zimmerman. Bob Dylan, 80 years old. Where did time go? We were having so much fun. All right, I'm going to wrap it up right there. It's about 25 minutes. And we'll leave it there for the day. Peace, patience, persistence, and we'll see you soon.